Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We hope everyone is ready and prepared and happy to learn all that we can from Layla Ramirez, class of '09, for today's webinar, First Gen in the Workplace. We have so many of you on screen with us today, and I'm thrilled to see such an interest in such an important topic. We've heard time and time again that first gen student experience and first gen professional experience is something that people want more support around and want to learn more about. Before we begin, I wanted to introduce myself and our program to you all. My name is Dana Olivo, and I'm the Assistant Director for Alum Career and Professional Networks here at Smith. I work in our programs and events such as this to bring other Smithies together and to connect and build skills around professional goals. In addition to our virtual events, our team offers in-person networking opportunities, coaching opportunities, and connecting Smith alums with career coaches like Layla. And we compile on-demand resources for your access at any time to meet your individual needs. We have fabulous YouTube page with our past recordings of sessions. Sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied here. Sessions that we will share in our follow-up, as well as we have a LinkedIn group that has over 4,800 Smithies, which allows for professional connections to be built online. Anything you as a Smithy needs to find your vision of career and post-career success and fulfillment exists within our network. Our team is here to help you find it. Today's virtual session will be a combination of a presentation from Layla with moments of interactivity and application for all of us. I encourage everyone to grab a pen and paper so you can participate in those interactive moments. We will also have time at the end for general Q&A with Layla, though there will be also opportunities during the presentation for questions to be answered. I'm delighted to introduce Layla Ramirez, class of 2009. Layla is the founder and CEO of FirstOnes Collective, a firm dedicated to cultivating and nurturing the voices and dreams of first-generation professionals so that they can reach their potential. She has more than 10 years of experience also leading global diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives and coaching C-level executives as they navigate the DEIB journeys. Layla is well known for coaching the whole person and for asking generative questions that help leaders get unstuck. She takes pride in helping clients define success on their own terms and then helping them stay accountable to achieving that success. Layla proudly identifies as an Afro-Latina with Dominican roots. She was born and raised in the Washington Heights neighborhood of New York City and spent her formative years in Boston. She is both a first-generation college graduate and first-generation business school graduate, and is the first in her family to start her career in corporate America. Layla is fluent in Spanish and holds a BA in economics from Smith College and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Layla is based in Brooklyn, New York, where she lives with her husband, Michael. We are so lucky to have you here with us today, Layla, and I will turn it over to you just so we can get this workshop started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana. I appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many folks on, some familiar names and faces. I'm excited about what we're going to be talking about today and humbly present this for your benefit. So feel free, to engage in the way that feels appropriate to you and in the way that feels comfortable, and share or don't share as much as feels comfortable as well. So we want this to be a space where we can all sort of like make it our own. I encourage folks to come off a video, but I'm not, that's not adding any pressure, just in hopes of being able to, live into some of what we're talking about in terms of relationship building and building connection. And with that, I wanted to, again, sort of like just frame our discussion for today. So we're going to get interactive. I'm going to share a little bit. I'm going to ask you all to share with one another. And we're going to just sort of like flow with the energy, right? And so to get us started, I will move us into the next slide, where I'll just give you all a sense of like where we're headed. So next slide, please. Awesome. So essentially, we're going to be talking about what it is to network, what, the experiences of a first generation professional. We'll talk about some of the barriers and some of the strengths that we bring to networking, and then explore some strategies for effective networking. it's important to note that networking is critical for career advancement, and it provides access to opportunities and mentorship and all sorts of information. And then also importantly, first generation professionals, of which I identify as one, right? So you are in good company. We often navigate uncharted territories without, established professional networks or guidance. So the objective today really is to dig into some of those barriers, begin to sort of like reframe how we think about networking, and then ultimately to leverage the unique strengths that we have, to build some of these relationships and hold ourselves accountable to really growing our networks and deepening connections. Networking is crucial as we think about career growth. And but we can't overlook that there are certain things that work in our favor and others that we have to be mindful of if we're going to overcome the barriers. So I hope that you're able to walk away from here with some tools and some strategies to implement that benefit you and that you can share with others, because really we need to lift as we climb, right? So to get us started and get us interacting, let's move over to the next slide. And I wanted to ask you all a question about how you're coming into this space. What is coming to mind as you think about networking? Feel free to go ahead and add your responses in the chat. We were going to use Slido, but Slido is not here for us today, so we're just going to go ahead and do it in the chat. So go ahead and just put your comments in there. And we will just monitor that and give you all a second to think about it. What comes to mind when you think about networking? Give me the good, give me the bad, give me the ugly. No wrong answer here. Safe space. Okay, so I see it's important to have confidence as we think about networking. People who are thinking about like elevator pitches, relatability, relationship building. What else? Connecting, a chance to learn from someone new. Excellent. Being open-minded, connections with people who are different from us, asking for help. Okay, we'll give it another 30 seconds. And then we'll get back into the slides and sort of like establish some common ground. Any final inputs there? All right, learning from others in our field. Excellent. Okay. Thank you all for entering your comments there. We'll move on, right? Let's get into it. So when we think, next slide, please. Fake it till you make it. Great segue into this, right? Thank you all for the honesty and the transparency there. Sometimes exhausting because of the complexities of our own background. All valid, right? So I wanted to share a bit about, what networking is and what networking is not, right? When we think about networking, we really want to have in mind that it's really about forming genuine connections, right? And and them being mutually beneficial, a two-way street. And that it's really not just about it being one direction. It's not really supposed to be a transaction. It's more about an ongoing activity, a process, almost like a way of connecting that that we are intentional about and that we are strategic about. So we wouldn't want to necessarily think of networking as just going to ask for like a job or ask for a mentor. We really want to lead with value so that we can receive value. Relatedly, as we think about the industries that we're in and how to grow our network, it's not just about connecting and talking to people that we know and that are just like us. It's about being able to connect across difference, being able to learn new things, being able to have a diverse set of folks that we can lean on and that can lean on us as well, so that it's a two-way street and we can relate in those ways. When we think about, I want to call out a few really important pieces here that I had to learn, right? And I'll be transparent, right? One thing that you'll sort of get to know about me is that I tell it like it is, and I have no shame about sharing my own stories and my own missteps. So as someone who's introverted, I could have sort of like hid in the corner somewhere and just thought, networking is really not my thing. It's really more for extroverted folks. And culturally, I'm Latin American, right? Or like I'm Dominican, and we don't really do this self-promotion thing. It's really more so like we build connections authentically, just like by the way, but we're not necessarily being intentional or strategic about it because that feels really, I don't know, icky. So what I'll say, I want to just really quickly say, I was once there. And I have evolved my thinking, and hopefully through this conversation, that connection will also come together for you. It's really not just for extroverts. There are ways that introverts can also show up in a very confident, meaningful way that attracts people, right? It might be that you're starting off working and connecting mostly with introverts first. You might find us quietly sitting in a corner or sort of like waiting for the program to start. We're the early birds, right? Strategically thinking about where we're going to sit down. Go ahead and sit down next to someone who's already seated. That person is likely not working the room the way that an extrovert would. And then as it relates to the self-promotion piece, it's really not promotion as much as it is telling your story, right? It is opening yourself up to speak to others around the things that you are doing, the things that matter to you, that are meaningful. And so not unlike when you're sharing about, that beloved person in your life, we wouldn't think of, talking about, our dear loved ones as self-promoting as much as we would talk about, as much as we would think about it as just like sharing with the world how great they are and how much, we are loved. So I wanted to just impress upon everyone here that this is networking is accessible and available to all of us, and sometimes we just need to sort of reframe the way that we're thinking about it, so that we have an entry point that feels natural and authentic to us. So I'll pause there really quickly, just to see if we are tracking. Give me a thumbs up if you're still with me. If you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A function or go ahead and throw it in the chat, and I will be getting to them later on in the presentation, but want to make sure that folks are not sitting on any thoughts or comments. All good? Excellent. All right, so let's move on to the next piece here. All right, so as we think about this workshop or this session, I think it's important for us to ground ourselves in the first generation experience. It is not limited, right, to just folks that are coming from, for example, immigrant households, right, or families who are immigrating to the United States. I think we need to think more broadly about what the first gen experience is. There are folks who are the first in their families to enter a corporate and professional role. And that could be an American who wasn't raised in a family that, where folks did work in corporate America. We're folks that are coming from non-traditional backgrounds, working class, and so forth. I've already mentioned, the immigrant piece. What's important about this group of folks, or us really, to know and to keep in mind is that it's a lack of exposure to professional norms and cultures that often limit us in terms of being able to connect. These are the things, the barriers, if you will, that are invisible, that keep us from feeling like authentically a part of the experience that we might have in a workplace or in a work setting. And so it's not anything visible. You can't really put your finger on it, but you know it when you feel it. And then the next piece is really thinking of how the way that we learn, right, and come into an awareness of etiquette and jargon and these norms of the workplace is really by trial and error, unless someone sits us down, unless we have a mentor or someone that we can talk to really help us unpack some of this stuff. And initially, I'll say, I had mentors and sponsors in my career very early who I felt comfortable asking what you would otherwise think were like inappropriate questions, right? Things that I didn't understand. Why do we, use acronyms for everything? And why are we, dressed the way that we do? And why don't people speak up in certain meetings or at certain times? These are some of those unwritten sort of like rules that, folks that, for example, specialize in the work that I do, which is more, in my full-time experience around DEIB, we are trying to make the invisible, right? So that way we can have a conversation that really resonates and that is able to include folks that, are coming to the experience of the workplace from a different angle. And I often take this opportunity to say, just because we are coming from a different place, like difference is not less than, right? And it's the first seed that I want to plant. We might find ourselves in places where folks might think, or they're coming from a narrative that is a limiting narrative, or that it's a deficiency narrative, and that's just not the case. Different is different, and we'll talk a little bit about later on about how difference makes a positive difference. So with that, let us move on to the next slide and get into it. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this previously. It's important to note, right, if we're gonna have an honest conversation here, right, if we're gonna truly connect on, what the first gen experience is about, we have to really keep in mind the things that are holding us back, right? Some of them, we can work on personally and independently, and some of them we really do need our allies. I know some of them are on the phone here. Thank you all for being here. We need our allies and the communities around us to also be knowledgeable so that they can also participate in eliminating some of these barriers and help us help us to get a boost of confidence to go in and speak truth to power as it relates to some of the things that we're experiencing. First, we could start, and I mentioned this previously, we're really not necessarily always plugging into established networks. But thankfully, Smith College, I would say, is one of the first established networks and the alumni base, for example, that I plugged into. And when I graduated Smith, I was like, all right, this is it. I'm on my way. And there are other communities that you can plug into, and I'll speak to some of them later on that in my own experience. But this limited access to established networks, also when you think about the unfamiliarity of the networking norms, so how do you start the conversations, and what's the appropriate etiquette, these things are sort of like chip away at any confidence that you could have. Imposter syndrome and fear of rejection, often, that experience of feeling othered is really sort of like running in the back of our minds. And then it goes with, I mean, I have to say, right, that as someone who is like a Latina woman in particular, right, the cultural norms and expectations are quite different, right? And the priorities culturally are quite different, although they're evolving, to the ones that are expected at work, right? And the demands that I have at work. And so it almost feels like you might be suffering in silence sometimes, or trying to reconcile two entire identities, or potentially that you're fragmented in how you are showing up. But fear not, you're not alone. There are other folks on this call who can also sort of like identify with that. And then the last couple pieces that I'll mention is, the financial constraints and the lack of mentorship and sponsorship are pretty critical, right? So when we think about being able to access spaces, places, conversations that could be career accelerating, it takes someone who's in that space to be able to sort of like bring us in many cases. And then when we talk about things like, I'm sure some of you all have experienced, the golf outings and the vacations and the clubs, right? These require financial commitments, and depending on where you're coming from and what your background is, you may not be similarly situated to someone who can afford that. And so these barriers are some very well known, others that we sort of carry with us and don't really speak about. But I wanted to honor them in this conversation, because I want you to know that I see you, I relate, and that even with these things being top of mind for us, there is a path, right? There is hope. So with that, let us move to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to get, again, interactive. I want to hear from you all. I want to talk a little bit about switching up the narrative, right? So I talked at the beginning about how it's like how we go into networking really shapes the experience that we have. And so I want to talk a little bit about like, okay, so we have these differences, we're coming from a different background, but how does our experience as a first generation professional make a positive difference? So maybe you need to like just sort of like switch your thinking, close your eyes real quick, open up your eyes. But let me know in the chat, what are the things that make a positive difference of coming from a first gen professional background? Come on, y'all, don't be shy. Okay, able to advocate for customers with less financial literacy. Okay. You're able to advocate for first gen, interesting different perspective, adding good questions, helpful to others because no assumption based on experiences. Beautiful. Speaking more truths than people may not know. They may be uncomfortable discussions. Bringing ideas that can make the culture of a job more comfortable. Love it. Love it. Resilience, empathy, inclusive leadership. Yep. You can call out assumptions. There's a passion there, a fire, right, to make a difference and to keep improving things. So we're holding these places that we're in accountable, right, for being better. Beautiful. Acute observations, yep. Ability to see barriers others might not see. Perfect. I love it. I love it. All right, keep it coming, y'all. Keep it coming. We're gonna really quickly, some of you all have mentioned a good number of, the ones that I would want to share, but if we move to the next slide, I just want to recap some of them and add a few that maybe you weren't thinking about. So first and foremost, resilience and adaptability are critically important. And I want you to sort of think about where I'm going and where I'm going to sort of like land this at the end of the slide, right? We bring unique perspectives, right? The work ethic unparalleled, right? It's almost like you have something to prove. So you are 2 and 3 times better sometimes, right? We talked about the empathy and the emotional intelligence. And then there's this thirst for knowledge. We are natural community builders, right? We're good at this stuff. We do it in our, in our families, we do it in our communities. And then importantly, we have a culture of giving back, right? And part of that stems from this experience of knowing that we cannot do it, or we should not do it, or we would not prefer to do it. We prefer not to do it on our own, right? We come from collectivist experiences where it takes a village, right? In many cases. And so we know that, people gave to us. And so we've made a commitment to pay it forward. So that giving back piece is really important. What I want to leave you with in this, after, exploring this list of strengths that we bring to any connection that we're making, is that these are all the hallmarks of great leadership. These are the attributes that, as you think about what companies are saying they want in leaders and who they suspect will be leading the next generation of companies and initiatives, it's you, right? It's you, the people who have experience, like literally you're native in these strengths, right? You grew up in these strengths. Your environment your environment has encouraged you to really fine tune these strengths. And so we need to lead with these strengths, right? And the thought is that these strengths really showcase the unique contributions that we bring to any organization, right? Helping to foster really important and critical things like innovation, collaboration, leadership, resilience. Like these are the things that companies are after. So I want you all to keep that in mind as you are continuing in this discussion, and also just as you are as you leave this workshop and as you move on to your next opportunity to build a connection. You are coming from a place of strength, from a place of power. So with that, let's go to the next slide, and then we'll land the plane and go into an exercise. Okay, so I'm going to break the presentation rules and read the slide because I think it's critically important for us to connect and to all experience, these words together, right? So first generation professionals possess incredible strengths, resilience, adaptability, and unique perspectives that set them apart. The key to unlocking the full potential of these strengths lies in how they approach networking. And by they, I mean we, because I am also saying these words to myself. By reframing networking as authentic relationship building, rather than a transactional activity, these strengths can become powerful tools for forging meaningful and lasting connections. This is not a one-time thing, y'all. you are well positioned to succeed at this. But I'll pause real quick. Let me see if folks are still with us. Any comments, reactions, questions? Go ahead and put them in the chat. Let's keep the vibes going and the energy flowing. All right. And I see Marilyn, you mentioned sharing our story, perhaps experiences others unfamiliar, cross-cultural understanding. Yeah, I like to think of that as like, there's that cross-cultural understanding and then like a cognitive agility that we have. So we can do this quickly, right? And on the fly in a way that like we have a competitive advantage at, right? So yeah, Sarah, totally with you. Never like the transactional part of it. Yeah, I'm glad that the reframe can help you all. Okay, cool. So next we're gonna move into some practice, y'all. So we're gonna get into some breakouts. Please do not drop off. I know that the introvert in me often takes this as a cue to go ahead and drop off and come back. I encourage y'all not to do this. This is super chill and it would be good practice for you all as you consider trying this stuff out and leaving here with a new approach. So next slide, please. Awesome. So we're going to go into breakout groups. We're going to practice building a relationship, y'all. The prompt has been shared in the chat. I will encourage, we will post it in the chat once more because you might not be able to see it once you go into the chat, into your breakouts, but here are the instructions. So I want you all to think about the strengths we just talked about, honoring the barriers that we're, trying to eliminate and not be held back by, and the ones that resonated most with you, right? As you enter this practice, think about how those relate to what you can give and what you hope to get out of building a new relationship with someone who's unknown once you go into this next breakout. So that's what I want you all to keep top of mind. And then here are some just some quick instructions so that we don't spend too much time in the logistics of this. So we're going to assign roles, right? So there'll be 3 of you, and in some cases maybe 4, or just 2, right? 3 or 2 people in pairs, or triads. And for the folks that have 3 folks in there, you'll have 1 speaker. You'll have 1 person who's 2 people that are having a conversation. So speaker 1, speaker 2, and then an observer who will be taking notes and just noting the things that resonate. And what I'd like is for, thinking about the alphabet, if your last name, the first letter of your last name starts closest to the letter A in the alphabet, you are speaker number 1. If your last name starts with a letter that is closest to the letter Z, you are speaker number 2. And if your name is somewhere in the middle, you are the observer and the note taker. And so with that, I want you all to just go ahead and practice introducing yourself and then going through the sequence of questions. And let's come back afterwards and we'll debrief what that interaction was like and what you're taking away from it. So with that, we're going to also give you all some cues, let you know when it's time to switch roles. Everyone will play each role once, and so you'll have 3 conversations total. Everyone will have an opportunity to just sit back and observe, and everyone will have an opportunity to be speaker 1 or speaker 2. So with that, let's send people into breakout land, and we'll give you all 10 minutes, and we'll come back at 1:10. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you walked away with 2 new connections, 2 new relationships. It is important as we are learning that we are practicing and that we're implementing some of the things that we are learning, right? So I want to hear from all of you. I want to encourage folks to come off mute and jump into the conversation. This is our question, right? This is what we're considering, right? What helped make this conversation feel more like a real connection rather than just a professional exchange? Maybe it felt more authentic and less transactional. I want to hear what the experiences were from folks that just practice. Come on off mute. Let me know how you feel, what you're thinking. And if you prefer to engage in the chat, that's perfectly all right. But would love to hear a few voices if you feel okay to do that.
I can start. So I was the observer in the group, and the first person that spoke essentially said, like, this was a lot, there's a lot happening this year, and honestly, I need to take some time to think about what my initial goals are. So already that sort of broke the like perfectionism or um the desire to like just have to just be professional. So that created some vulnerability and honesty. And then the second person shared a goal that was pretty personal and not work related, which was awesome. And I would see the hesitation from both was the question of what can you give? And I wondered if that's often as first generation, we don't often get asked what we can give. It's often we're asked, like, we're usually the ones asking for things. And so I could see that hesitation of, oh, taking a step back and say, what can we give in this space? I wondered if we don't often get asked that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doris. I appreciate you taking the conversation there. Hold me accountable to coming back to that. It's a thing. There's a there, right? But I don't want to get into it too much. But thank you, Doris. Anyone else want to come off mute and share a bit? We have some folks in the chat, so maybe I'll go to the chat while someone comes off mute. And Daisy, would you mind just reading off what you're seeing in the chat, and then once we have a couple from the chat, we'll come back to the folks who want to come off mute.
Absolutely. So Deborah said there was nothing at stake except to talk. So that made it seem easier. Jennifer Kelly is sharing that she has to hop off early, but wanted to thank Layla for the workshop and enjoyed speaking with Asitao. And the key to the connection was being vulnerable and sharing about their experiences at Smith as a first gen. We're seeing a theme of vulnerability, being willing to be vulnerable and real, sharing experiences and stories which resonate, acknowledging what the other person is giving. Shayla has shared that I think I have a worksheet that can help folks write and brainstorm about what they can give.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Daisy. And Shayla, appreciate you for offering that up. That's one perfect example there, y'all, of what you have to give, right? It's if you know something that feels like it's appropriate for the moment, just jump in and share it. So we'll make sure we get that, Shayla, from you, and we circulate that to folks afterwards. Maybe that could be the thing that makes all the difference. So thank you for that. Anyone else want to jump in and share, just come off mute and share their observations or their experience?
Hey, Layla, this is Grace. First of all, I was really lucky to be matched with Grace Lee. It's just the two of us. We had a lot of time. Um, so it was really cool. I think the other thing that I didn't say in chat was being a little bit more detail oriented, so you actually have something to hang on to and ask more question of. I thought that really helped me to get to know Grace more, and to then say, oh yeah, I have very similar stories. And that kept the conversation going.
I love that, Grace. Thank you for that. And it's a perfect segue, right? So we'll take that. Actually, we have a few more in the chat, but I want to say it's a perfect segue to what we're going to get into next. So I think just want to honor Marianne, the genuine interest and question to try and understand the situation presented. So that's another thing that's important. There's something about the context of we are here to build relationships, right? We are here, we have a common interest in learning how to do this that makes it safe and easy and accessible for us to all engage. And that is not just true of this environment. It is true of any environment that you might go to, right? People that all show up to the same event, there's always a like, well, what brought you to this event? There's a common interest there, right? And so you can leverage some of these, like I'll call them like low-hanging fruit or really easy entry points into a conversation to get to know people's stories, motivations, and interests. So we'll moving on to the next slide. I want to recap a few of the things that you might have been experiencing. I'm sorry, that was the question there. We can move on to the next slide. Okay, just want to recap and name some of the things that made this feel a little different, right? First and foremost, I like to forget about networking, completely cross it off, and just replace that with relationship building anywhere that I see networking. because that's relatable to me. It feels authentic. It takes the transactional pieces of things out of the way for me, and it unblocks my thinking, right? It really just becomes about, can you get to know someone new? Can you share your story with someone different? And so with that, right, I want to jump into a few strategies, right? A few keys, right, if you will, to networking and building relationships, or sorry, building relationships, not networking. So first is shifting, right? That shift, right? And you see, I'm still on a journey. It's still something that I'm working on. But the idea really is to move away from a mindset that's purely transactional, right? And really to one that is about forming authentic connections. Second, right, it's about leading with value. And I will say that your story is a gift. So that is the first thing. Your why, your interests, your thing that you learned last week, these are all things and values that you can share, right? And so bring those and bring those and lean into the power of that, right? Then there's this piece around being authentic. I like to take this opportunity to remind people that it's important to be yourself. Who you are is not negotiable, and who you are makes all the difference, right? To the degree that you can share your story, you allow the other folks that you're speaking with to also share more of themselves. And to Grace's point, right? The more detailed you can be, to the extent that you're comfortable, right? The more detailed you can be, the more you can give people entry points into connections that are meaningful and valuable to you. So this is how we get to like a meeting of the minds, a meeting of the hearts, if you will, right? Next is really thinking about things from like a mutual benefit standpoint. If you go into this thinking, there's always going to be something to learn, i.e. there's a new story, there's a new person, right? Or you go into it thinking, I have a question, maybe there's an answer in this interaction. You go into it expecting that there's going to be value, then the way that you show up is similar, right? You're thinking, and if there is value for me to receive, then there is also value for me to give. There's also something that I can contribute, right? And by the sheer fact that we are in this together right now, we have a common interest. We have a common topic. We have an entry point into something that brings us together. And then other pieces that I don't want to necessarily go into each of these, but I'm sure that you are either on the receiving end of this. Active listening is really, really critical, right? This idea that we can listen deeply, that we can sort of like with a look or just with like the nod of a head, acknowledge, see, validate, what folks are thinking about, or, the culturally is a thing for me. And so I just want to encourage you all that to the extent that it feels appropriate, right? Let's bring more of like the things that establish a rapport in those ways as we are connecting, because these things are critically important. And then I'll touch on this last piece around going beyond the formal professional setting, right? So networking or building relationships is available to you anywhere, right? I have a husband who is extremely extroverted and makes a friend just in places that as an introvert, I'm like, we have to do this right now? And it just is a constant reminder to me that at the coffee shop, on the subway, as you're heading down the street, if you run into someone randomly, like literally, like they bump into you, those are opportunities to connect, right? And so we don't have to wait for these formal settings, although I would say that as someone who is more introverted would prefer to connect with someone on something that I already know that they're interested in. I do leverage professional settings, but that's not the end all be all, right? This is an environment that's really more of like a community, right? And so here we can also network. And here we know that Smith College is a common bond that we have. And, we might have lived in a Smith College house, and we have a year that we graduated. And so these are all entry points into conversations where we both have something to share and something to give. So just want to impress that upon you all as we transition to the next piece, because it's really thinking about being strategic, right? About where do I feel most equipped to connect with people, right? Where do I feel most confident? How do I set myself up for success? There's an environmental piece to this that I want to also share with you. So let's move on to the next slide. And you'll see there's a lot, there are a number of things that are listed here. And these are strategies for relationship building. They're not necessarily listed in the order that I think that they are the easiest to implement, but I am going to leverage the slide to share my story, right? So as I think about my evolution as someone who others would regard as a skilled networker, which I don't necessarily identify as that. I just think I'm really great at connecting and building with people and hearing their stories and sharing mine. A lot of this started for me getting comfortable connecting with people as I was doing volunteer work, right? So I volunteered on a board early in my career, and being on that board meant that everyone else was equally committed and interested in that mission. And so that mission was an entry point into being able to share more about like, well, when did you first get interested in this? And what did you do before this? And what do you think this interest is going to manifest in as you think about going forward? And then those conversations build some connection, they build some familiarity and then some trust. And that allows us to go into other, I'm going to call them other rooms in that person's house, right? So we might start in the living room, but then we're talking about, then we're like in the kitchen and we're talking about career. Then we are in the backyard and we're talking about fun activities that we like to do in our free time. And it really just stems from, we have a common interest, right? So that's where I started. So I would encourage you all to think about what could you do in your free time and how can the folks that you are surrounded by help you to build connections or to grow beyond just that common connection that you have. Like what other rooms can you explore with people that you are already sort of like similarly situated with, right? The next is joining professional organizations. And this, I mentioned it earlier. There are several communities. I'm going to rattle off a few here. Several communities, Smith College being one of them, right? And the alumni clubs, right, being a related community that allow you to connect with people who have a common experience, and that from there you can build to other things around career and work life, right? So that's an example, but then there were others that are more career focused. So Inroads, for example, is a program that helps professionals from backgrounds like ours to get roles, fast track jobs in industry across a number of different industries. So I interned there, and it became like a class of 250 plus people that now are accessible to me. We have a common experience. We did this program together. The same is true of an organization called Management Leadership for Tomorrow. And then, I graduated and went to HBS, Harvard Business School. So there's that connection. And then there are, of course, the boards that I volunteered on. So there's like Bottom Line, right, is a career development, is a college access program that I'm both the beneficiary of, an alum of, and was once on the advisory board for. And these are all opportunities to just build and connect with people that have a common interest, right? Or that are there because they care, right? So those are some ways to sort of like set yourself up and go into environments where there's less of a barrier, right? Because there is already an established interest that you can build off of. And then the next are more sort of like tactical. So leveraging LinkedIn, right, to send a quick note and then ask for an informational interview. As long as you're not, I think people are open to like sharing their experiences, as long as you're not like asking them for a job directly, but you're asking about, hey, what about this company really excites you? Or what brought you to this industry? Folks are typically very, very happy to share, especially like, for folks who are trying to switch careers, right? The more you can share about what your motivation is behind connecting, the more likely that folks would want to connect and the more depth of that connection there could be. Hosting and organizing events, right? So this is, again, in order of like how I've evolved. So if you are the organizer of an event, you make yourself the central point of the experience, right? And so what that means is that people are coming to you to ask questions. And so you don't even have to break the ice. It turns out that they want to talk to you because they want to be a part of what you're doing, right? So this is similar with like taking on leadership roles. You put yourself in a position where folks are coming to you as opposed to you having to go to them. Then there are attending industry events. So as you get more senior in your career, as you are navigating transitions, as you're exploring opportunities to go to graduate school or potentially like take on an expanded role or responsibility, connecting with people that are going to industry events. So we could call these like conferences or professional network events. there are people that are there trying to do similar things, right? And so that means that you have, like, whatever the topic is, or whatever the focal point or the community that they are targeting, benefiting, that is your way in, right? That is what you leverage as you're connecting with people. Well, hey, how did you first get connected to this organization? Or what attracted you to this industry event to begin with? Or what are you taking away from this that you think you'll be able to implement in, you know, when you head back to where you're going next? So these are the ways that you might be able to really accelerate being able to meet more people. And then the last piece, right, as you can see me doing now, right, which is, you know, I am growing and evolving, and this is a way also to attract people and to connect with people and to share your story, so that as you share your story, right, so public speaking, as you share your story, people resonate with things that you say, or both in positive and negative ways, right, in some cases, and that becomes a connection, right? So you might say to me, hey, Layla, I have a different point of view on that. Oh, you do? Well, great. Well, tell me what your point of view is. And there's something new for me to learn. And then there's value that we've exchanged, right? Or I really appreciate you sharing your story. It makes me feel like when I go into a next setting, I can share more of myself, and I learned some language that was helpful for me in terms of articulating something that was difficult to say before. So that is another example, right? Being able to share your story, public speaking, being able to connect with people in these sorts of forums are also helpful strategies for building relationships. So I'll pause there. I feel like I said a lot. I want to hear reactions. I know that there's some stuff going on in the chat. Daisy, if you don't mind, just bringing me up to speed on what the activity is there. Or folks, if you want to come off mute and just let me know how this is landing, would be happy to just give a moment there.
Have a couple of comments in the
Okay.
chat that I'll read
Cool.
for you. Deborah says volunteer work is really critical. Meet people, show your willingness to think and act beyond yourself. It can feel very comfortable. Veronica is sharing also that they have found getting on boards, committees to be much easier than expected. They say that when I was younger, I assumed it was difficult and required a lot of expertise. A lot of times it's mostly about showing up. And then Grace is sharing, a lot of this has a spirit of generosity, giving back, as Layla said, thinking win-win. Deborah also mentioned that hosting an event is a great idea. Love your point about people then coming to you, making the interaction easier, and people believe you have something to offer because you're the host or convener of the event. And Estelle says, very insightful. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daisy. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone who's been commenting in the chat. So that is sort of like what I wanted to share in terms of, like, you know, the strategies here. But I would be remiss if I didn't sort of like bring this home by coming back to, like, how do we break through some of the challenges, right? And what roles do we, like, how much can we own versus how much can we challenge the environments, the people in our lives, our allies, to really set us up for success. So if we, let's go on to the next slide. I wanna share a bit about the importance of, first, right? I want to honor that, like, the anxiety, right, of, oh my God, I gotta go in this room and I gotta meet somebody new. That is very real, right? And the way to get ahead of it, the way to feel more confident to break through that is really preparation, right? Preparation, practice, and really starting small, right? So something as small as a follow-up after this this workshop. If you see some names on here that are folks that are also interested in the first gen experience, you might say, hey, look, I saw you on this workshop, would love to hear a little bit more about your experience, right? Starting small, where there's already a connection. Then I wanted to also come back to this idea of taking the practical steps to expand your network. So putting yourself in the position where you would be successful and where the strengths that you offer, that you bring, are valued, right? So there is a role that you play in setting yourself up for success there. And then, I might sound like a broken record, but I have to always, land this particular plane. It is critically important for you to approach this from a place of, I have something to offer. I have strengths that I bring, and who I am is the prize, right? Who I am is non-negotiable. I'm going to be authentic, even if it requires courage, even if it's not what is expected. It's about being able to expand the aperture that folks have and to take up the space that you rightfully deserve and that you rightfully should own. So that is sort of like the role that we play as first-gen professionals to overcome some of these barriers to building relationships. Next, on the next slide, I want to speak a little bit to some of our allies who are in the room. I want to share specifically what it looks like, right? To be an ally and to be a co-conspirator, as I like to say, around creating conditions for the success of first-gen professionals and building these relationships. So first is, you're sort of like off to a great start, right? You are recognizing the barriers, right, that first-generation professionals face by being in the session, right? I designed these slides intentionally so that you can like take them and just share them with someone who also could be interested, right? So that they know, okay, here's the one slide, that's for me. I have a role to play, right? Second is being intentional, right? And being intentional about curating experiences that keep some of those barriers in mind, right? So that would look like, as we think about this particular experience, the topic of this workshop says who this is for, is the connection that brings us all together. That makes it easier for folks who are interested in learning more, doing more, to connect. It's understanding that there's certain formats that lend themselves to people connecting more easily versus not. So that's the difference of like just having an open sort of like seating versus having assigned seating so that people are sort of forced to speak to the people next to them. Now, going up to a random stranger isn't as there's not as much high stakes in that. So those are just a few examples, but we can talk about a lot more if you want to follow up with me. I'm happy to share. Importantly, we want to do everything that we can as allies to give that boost, give that pep talk to the folks who are first-gen professionals, right? Remind them you have all these strengths. You're adaptable. You are the leadership that we are waiting for. You have a story to share. You have a different perspective. We need to lift them up as they're going into some of these uncharted territories. There's also an opportunity to offer tailored opportunities for first-generation professionals to grow their skills and expand their knowledge. So here, I specifically think about if you're in a position to bring a first-generation professional person aside and explain to them, hey, what you just observed in that interaction, here's what was really going on there, right? Really that behind the scenes sort of like talk track is really critical to help make those connections. And so there's a role that we play in observing or knowing, oh, this person probably hasn't been exposed to this. Let me stand in the gap. Similarly, right, when we think of like, solutions like this at scale, it's if there's a way to offer some etiquette courses to give people exposure into, here's how we set the table at a gala, right? Here's what's expected. These are the norms of how people interact. This is how people deliver presentations. This is how, this is how people overcome challenges. To the extent that we can create these experiences and recognize and speak to the experiences of first-gen professionals, we will be setting them up that much more for success. And then the last, we all have a workplace that we belong to, that we have belonged to, that we will belong to, and just an environment that we operate in. And so to the degree that you can play a role in lowering the stakes, creating environments that are comfortable for people, eliminating some of the concerns, and really addressing some of those needs, right, which could take the shape of like barriers, step into that, right, and be courageous, and be direct about the fact that that's what you're doing, so that you could also be appreciated and receive the gratitude from the folks who are benefiting from your efforts. So it's a two-way street there. So those are the key pieces that I wanted to leave sort of like, FGPs with, and then also our allies with. And then if we move on to the next slide, I just want to really quickly recap where we've come from today. And then from here, we're going to be going into like next steps and then any open questions that we've got. So first and foremost, my goal was to ensure that, we were able to get to a place where we weren't thinking about networking at all. Rather, we're talking about relationship building. Second, it was important for me that I stressed upon everyone that, we need to lead with our strengths and we need to know what those are so that we can be confident in that. Second, it's important for folks to understand that like there are barriers, like these are real, right? And preparation and practice is really what gets you over the hump. Next, this idea of relationship building, it's not like something that you can just jump into, right? You really have to think about what is my way? What's the way that I feel the most powerful, the most confident, and that works for me? Maybe it's that volunteering approach. Maybe it's the hosting an event approach, or maybe it's just, attending workshops like this where we have a common interest that attracts people. Find your way and start there. Start small, but the point is to start and keep it moving incrementally. And then lastly, allies, we have a role to play, right? And I say we because my experience is not necessarily the next FGP's experience. And so I can be an ally for an FGP that is experiencing things that are different than what I experience, right? So we all have a role to play, and I want us to lean into the power that we have to shape other people's experiences. So with that, let's move into like a call to action or like the next steps that I want you all to take away. So next slide, please. And I mentioned some of this already, right? So FGPs, start small, focus on relationship building, right? Pick your strategy, make sure that you are continuing to expand your network beyond just the people that you have an interest with, right? Expand beyond and across difference, right? Lean into your strengths and be authentic. Be you, right? Be present, be persistent. And then allies, create supportive environments, right? Offer mentorship, resources, move the pieces behind the scenes to ensure that the connections that are important for people to take away, that those are connections that are being made, right? Be proactive and let's foster inclusive spaces that create the conditions for FGPs to have a level playing field to build relationships as folks who are not FGPs. And with that, my final thought before we go into the Q&A here is, y'all, networking is a journey, right? It's not a destination, right? By reframing networking as relationship building, we can unlock the potential that we all have to create lasting connections that support our growth and our success, right? So I want you all to keep that in mind as you leave this place and go into your next to do for the day. And I want to just thank you from my whole heart for spending this time with me. I'm happy to take any questions that you all have. And if folks, need to drop off or what have you, feel free. I won't be offended if you do, but that's what I've got. So what's up? Tell me what's on your mind or any questions that you might have. Or we can move to the Q&A slide.
Layla, this is
Yeah.
Daisy. I can ask a question from the pre-registration.
Mhm.
So there was a theme about how to combat feeling isolated as a first-gen professional in the workplace.
Okay, great question. So I would say thinking about the workplace, right? You don't need a whole squad of people. Like, find your person, right? Find your person, one person who you feel that you can share your story with, one person who you feel that understands and that you can connect on a deeper level than a transactional level, and have engage this person in helping you to expand beyond that, right? So essentially what you're doing is creating like a safe space for yourself to come back to. And that's going to also help you to stay accountable to trying different things, right? So once it's kind of like when you write down a goal, right? Once you engage someone into this journey, you can't take it back. All right. And if you give them the permission to keep on checking in with you and challenging you to do more, they will do that, right? But you also have to show up and play your part. So I would say that's one way that you can begin to sort of like eliminate that isolation. And then there's also sometimes, I'll be real, right? There's also sometimes where the isolation is happening sort of like in the workplace, like in your actual setting where you're doing your work day to day, but there are adjacent communities, right? So these professional networks, right? And professional programs where you can connect with people who are having a similar experience, but maybe at a different company, right? And the same thing goes, right? So here, now you found sort of like your tribe. It's outside of work, but this is your safe space to go back to work. This is your safe space to get that pep talk and then to go and try something new. And so that is how you can, you know, both internally and externally eliminate some of those feelings of isolation. But I will be honest, it takes time and it takes commitment, right? So you have to sort of lean in, you know, and not be sort of like deterred by like, you know, it's not always going to work out right away. You just got to keep at it. Keep at it.
Layla, there's a question in the chat. Sarah, how to combat not knowing certain things or skills? I feel that my imposter syndrome most times is apparent. Would you say just to lean in and embrace it? That is kind of what I've been doing, and it has helped some.
Oh, I appreciate the question and the answer, Sarah. Thank you. So the truth is that like saying that there's something that you don't know to someone is it's a courageous thing that you can do, but also because it's a vulnerable thing, it's something that connects you to someone in a very meaningful way, right? It's much better to lean into that discomfort because that discomfort will be temporary. Because once you have said, I don't know, now this person is in a place where they might be able to help you understand or to connect you to where you can sort of like understand things better. And so it's a temporary inconvenience that has an outsized positive impact. Whereas not sharing that you don't know means that you're gonna be sort of like in the dark, right? And that you're gonna be sort of like experiencing that loneliness of like, man, I really don't know this. And I'll be honest, right? It gets better. And I don't know, Sarah, maybe you can let us know in the chat or you can come off mute and tell me. I feel like when you first do it, like when you're first honest about like, hey, I don't know that. Can you share a bit about, you know, what this means or what that is? It's like nerve-wracking. But I feel like the nerves around it dissipate more and more as you practice it more and more. But Sarah, I don't know. That's one experience of one. Let me know, Sarah, in the chat or come off mute and let me know if that resonates. Okay, so Sarah says, yeah, you're right. It does get better. Neuroplasticity. Yes. So yeah, we're creating new pathways in our brain, right? So they don't go directly to like the anxiety every time. It goes to like, oh, this is a new path. Okay, and we continue to forge that path down that road. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing your experience.
Veronica says, as a manager, I always appreciate people who ask for help, ask about things that they don't know about. So affirming what you've just shared.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank
In
you,
the-
Veronica. I appreciate
In
that.
the pre-question, oh, go ahead, Doris.
I have a question about asking for financial guidance. And so oftentimes I have to initiate those conversations, for example, setting up a retirement account. And so similar of what we feel as a first-gen college student, there's a lot of the hidden curriculum in the workplace. And so what is your advice or resources that are commonly or available to first-generation professionals where we can ask those questions to say, okay, how am I maxing out my retirement account, or what are benefits that are worth using, or resources, or professional coaching? Like I feel like some people already know that, or they learn it from other people. And so if you had any resources that would be worth checking out for that.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking that question, Doris. I'm going to say something that's going to sound that I wouldn't say in any other setting, but you know, Smith is, you know, and all of y'all are like different, right? First and foremost, call me or text me or email me. I'm happy to connect you and share the good, the bad, and the ugly about how I did it and how I connect like my mentees in terms of like when they're getting started as well, or just broadly, like depending on where you're at. So that's an open invitation for all of you all, right? The second thing that I'll mention, which is less, I would say, is less about me and more about like leveraging the resources that are available to you at work. In particular, as it relates to like a 401k and whether you're maxing that out, there is typically an administrator. There's someone who is the sort of like the decision maker about these instruments, right? And there's typically like a phone number that you can call. Do not underestimate the power of calling that phone number, right? Do not underestimate the power of reaching out to the person in the benefits department, for example, of the HR team and asking them, hey, this is my first time doing this. Can you, or is there someone who you can connect me with who can help me to figure this out for the first time, right? And what I'll say to maybe ease the concerns that there might be about doing that is that the reason that these people exist is to help you. In many ways, these people serve at the pleasure of the customer, and you are the customer. So it's not unlike you going anywhere where you are buying something or where you are requesting something, and as the customer, they have a responsibility to answer your questions until you are satisfied, right? And if they cannot do that for you, then be confident and go ahead and ask to speak to the next person, because the problem is not you, it's them, right?
Yeah.
And that's the role that they're in.
I
right?
actually told our CEO about this in terms of retire. So I went straight up to
Okay, shout out to you.
leadership.
Well, Doris.
And it actually led to, I'm also thinking like financial planning. I told our CEO, this is my first time in an environment where a lot of people own a home.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, how do I get to a point where I can one day own a home? And then I shared that if it would be possible to get any other resources. What ended up happening is that he brought this up to his executive team and they invited Fidelity to a retreat that we all do as employees. And then the head of HR came up to me and said, hey, all of our sessions sold out. And I said, well, I'm glad I was vulnerable enough to say, I don't understand this. And that this led to clearly I wasn't the only one that needed the support or guidance. And so it was a good lesson for me to, one, say, okay, it's okay to be vulnerable. I had to learn that at Smith because you have a lot of know-it-alls at Smith. And I had to say, either I put my ego aside and ask, if not, I'm going to be crying in the library if I don't bring this up. But it kind of just stops at like retirement. And so my question was sort of guided towards like, yeah, one day I would love to be able to have an endowed scholarship at Smith or just try to have those of like figuring out how do people make more money in this world and space when you come from communities that it's like everything, either you save it under the mattress or you keep it in the bank and then do anything else. So any resources of like how do we increase that wealth while managing student loan debt? And I think a lot of people come from, oh, well, my parents set it up for me, or um, I went and did a finance or investing type of course, and I'm like, okay, but where? So thank you.
Daisy, not Daisy, Doris, you are doing it again. And Daisy, you already know where I'm going. So Doris, I think what you're mentioning, right? It was one of the questions that I had leaving Smith and there weren't resources, but this I think is one of the critical topics, right? That there is not, like there's a dearth of programming in, particularly programming that speaks to the first gen experience, speaks to the people that don't have the established networks, that don't have the established know-how, right? And so Daisy, I would say that this is an excellent next step as we think about programming that really speaks to the experience of first-gen professionals and how they're navigating, you know, really sort of like setting themselves up, right? Setting ourselves up for success. And in many cases, like the thing to consider is if we want something we've never had before, we have to do something we've never done before, right? And that's also something like maybe our parents have never done before, so we can't go there. Also something that like people at work, someone else did it somewhere, another different way, right? And so we really need our own space to be able to connect with those professionals who are well positioned to advise us, who are licensed to do that in a way that that helps us to move the needle here. So thank you, Doris. I think, you know, I'm just gonna speak it into existence. Maybe there's something that's coming down the line that's similar to this, specifically about that.
We have
Any
a
other thoughts or
raised,
questions, reactions?
we
Oh,
have a
Kathy?
raised hand and I mispronounced your name once before. So thank you for giving me the pronunciation and make sure that I do it right this time. Asiatu, you have the floor.
Oh, first I just want to say thank you so much for this session. I learned so much. My question is more so about like conflict within the workplace. I work in DEI and I feel like the current state of the US is like a lot and it's heavy right now. So there's just like I don't know, just always having to be like really careful. But I feel like conflict is kind of inevitable in this type of work. And so I it, I was having trouble, I still kind of am having trouble when it comes to like conflict in the workplace, especially as like someone who's first gen, but also as like a Black woman in the workspace. And so I feel like that's something that I think can get really like complicated or can blow up really quickly. And like to not be seen as like an aggressor, but also to like make sure my points are getting across. And so like I would love to like know more about how to like address conflict in a way that benefits me, but also allows like my voice to be heard in the same way as like other people who have complaints or like conflict in the workplace.
Thank you so much for this question. And I just want to start by saying that I see you and I absolutely understand, right? It may not be the same exact experience, but I don't know if I mentioned this in my intro, but I am leading DEIB, social impact and sustainability, at a tech company based out of New York City. And it has been increasingly more difficult, right, to do this work. And so for folks who are not necessarily in this space, we are in a time, y'all, we are in a time. And what I would offer you is really just like very humbly, I didn't grow up in a family that addressed conflict head on and that had proper, I would say, skills and resources to do that constructively, right? I would say conflict is not always bad, right? It doesn't always have to have a negative connotation. I often like to tell people, you know, we are in conflict right now, but we suck compared to how good we're gonna be on the other side of this, right? So giving people like a vision of like, A, I'm in this, B, we're committed, C, we're gonna see this through. And I need your participation and your partnership to do that. But these are things that I had to learn, right? I became a mediator earlier in my career, and I sought out conflict management workshops, right? I sought out events and opportunities to practice these skills in low stakes environments, because we have to, as practitioners, we have to commit these things to memory when we're not emotionally hijacked, so that we can have access to them in times where we are, right? And then I also want to just speak to what could be an experience that may or may not be true for you, but like we're in an environment where we are called as practitioners to be, to a certain extent, to have a fragmented identity, right? To honor what is in the best interest of the company, even though it may go in conflict with what we personally feel and believe. And that's okay. That is the nature of this work, right? There's a concept that I learned in one of my employers, or a value that they share, that's called disagree and commit, right? Just know why you are committing, know that you disagree, honor that. And then once the decision is made, or once this is the direction that we're going in as the company, it is not about, like, you didn't fail anyone, right? By essentially like honoring what is in the best interest of the company. That is your job, right? And so I just want to offer you that, because it's not an end all be all. It is incredibly complex, and it's like, I think of us as like tightrope walkers right now. Everything is high stakes and everything is consequential. So I see you. And if you want to connect and you need like a safe space where you can, do all the things and say all the things and vent and try things, we can role play also. I do that a lot with my direct reports, because we need to practice these things. We can't expect that, just because I read a book, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to do it the way that I read it. It doesn't work like that. So please reach out to me.
Layla, thank
Thank
you so
you.
much
Yeah.
for your time today, and for everyone on the call. Thank you so much for your participation, your honesty, your questions, your follow-up ideas. And so this webinar today was a direct result from what I heard over the last year listening to Smithies across different identities, including the first gen identity, of what you all want and need from Smith. You have a benefit from being part of this network, and you have a benefit from being an alum, and we want to make sure that you receive those benefits in a really meaningful way. And the way that we can offer you more targeted programming is, if you haven't already done so, please engage with the Smith Network platform. A link will be put in the chat. This is your directory where you can find one another, but also where you can identify to us what identities are meaningful to you. And this will help me and my peers put together more meaningful events, workshops, topics of consideration that are impactful for you. So again, this came from a conversation I had with Layla about a year ago when I was new in my role. And we really talked about this idea of first genhood not ending. And I understand because I'm also a first gen graduate. It doesn't end when we graduate, right? It follows through. But it was hearing from Layla and others, and then having Layla having the commitment to follow through to present today. So with much appreciation for your time, for your advice, we will share out these slides. And if you have further questions, feel free to send them our way. I appreciate you. I hope that you have a peaceful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.